Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here, and get ready for Gnosis. Well, as I always have been saying over and over again and will to the day I die, there are solutions for everything, and it's a simple one, and it's been a historic problem since the beginning of mankind, and that is corruption, followed by the supporting of failure. We support losers and things that don't work, from the fire department to the military to everybody in between, and particularly scientists who produce nothing in all their fields. Here we run into another detailed, interesting story that everyone should know. Jackie Chan and the murder of Bruce Lee. Yes, right, Bruce Lee was murdered, and so was Jackie Chan almost. So, what does this mean? I originally got involved in this and started researching Jackie Chan from his kind of imperialistic statements that he's been making his entire life. And of course, a lot of other things he's done. And looking into him, being this imperialistic stand up for the totalitarian government of China and all of its potential evils, was annoying me. Of course, not that too many other places are any better. There's the gloss of freedom and the gloss of everything else in the rest of the Western world, which really is just a gloss. But certainly China and its practices of polluting the world, destroying everything, certainly is not a higher thought form or a better society. Unfortunately, societies just get into dog-eat-dog worlds and they don't really care. And certainly the Chinese have done that, and certainly continue to have a fairly bad history of abuse of everybody and everything, and don't seem to do anything to take care of ecological and other situations. I mean, I stay away from buying anything from China if I can do that, which is near impossible. But if you want to buy herbs or medications or other things, trusting anything from China is insane, and I don't know how much of it is tested. But so the whole idea is that I can't believe that anyone thinks China and its slave labor force that produces a lot of cheap stuff is in any way balanced. They have prisoners that work in factories. They have the military that works in factories. And all of these people are not really paid anything, including factories where people sleep there and everything else like slaves. And of course, we support that from buying from these scum. But that's another issue to a certain degree, but not really, because we're talking about Jackie Chan's support. Now, why is he supporting that? He's also attacked Taiwan, which is keeping in lockstep with the Chinese imperialistic attitude, where they think they own Taiwan and should invade it, kill everybody, and take it back. Well, it's an island off the coast of China where Chiang Kai-shek and others fled to and built quite a nice society there. After World War II and Mao pushing it. But their rhetoric is still the same. They'll, at all costs, they're going to invade Taiwan and kill everybody, even though they do billions of dollars of business with them and everything else. But that's typical Chinese rhetoric, but they certainly have the will and the money to do it if they want to. But that's the government there. Oddly enough, Jackie Chan, who has made negative comments about Taiwan and thinks that they should be part of the actual reunited with, if they really were ever part of communist China. Oddly enough, he is married to a Taiwanese woman, and I'm not sure any of this is accidental. He's a very manipulative person. He's trying to make his way in life, and he tries to do things which is in his best interest, and of course, I guess that's just a wise way of working. He doesn't want to conflict with the Chinese government, even though he's a Hong Kong resident, has been born in Hong Kong, which is kind of the Beverly Hills of China, and has special laws just for the Taiwan, just for the Hong Kongese. So what does that mean to begin with? He was even born in Hong Kong. Well, he's had interesting stories. I've been following Jackie Chan for many years. I've listened to a lot of commentaries on his films where he has spoken, and so has a lot of producers talking about him, the kind of guy he is, and what he does. Now, But what I want to cover here is really the connection between him, Bruce Lee, and the murder of Bruce Lee, and all of that goes with it. I don't like Jackie Chan's films. They're comedies. It's not really martial arts. It's more of a ballet where he grew up in the Chinese ballet and was lived there. His parents brought him to the Chinese ballet, I believe, at a very young age when his father moved to Australia to be a chef for the American embassy, apparently. Well, that's typical. You wouldn't hire an American anyway, so I guess we can take that for real. That's very typical of the Americans. Why bring an American down there and pay him well? Bring a Chinese guy, not even an Australian. Oh, so typical of the stoogey Americans. But the whole idea is that as we look at all these things, we need to. So Daddy went down there, and he went down there because Jackie, who went into school initially, failed the first grade. He apparently was semi-retarded, couldn't really keep up with anybody else. So what was his father to do? Well, his father figured that there was no hope for him in school, so he was able to get him into the Chinese ballet repertory company there. And this is pretty common in Asia. The Tibetans do this. They take 6, 7, 8-year-old children. I don't know if 10 is the minimum. I'm not sure. And they put them into monasteries for a huge part of their life. So here you are at 8 or 10 years old, and you're leaving your family to go into religious training, which is very typical of Tibetans who are psychotically connected to some foul religious system, which has done absolutely nothing for them or their culture or their world, period. What is it? Name me something that Tibet has given to anybody. Dun, 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 dun. Your answer? 0! Fundy hats, goofy clothes. The dummy llama has done nothing. So the whole idea is we move into the usual problem there. So this is not unusual. He said he was an orphan. I've heard him say on many interviews that he was an orphan. Well, he wasn't an orphan. And he reunited with his father, I believe, at the age of 16 or so. But, that's like 10 years later. But this is not unusual. He acted like he was an orphan. He's not an orphan. Daddy had a fairly decent position. I'm assuming he was paid fairly well as being the head chef for the American embassy in Australia. And Jackie couldn't do anything. And I'm not sure where his education came from now. I don't know how well he reads and writes. He does have great difficulty learning English and speaking it properly, like so many Asian actors do. They have a problem because Chinese is a language, and they always sound like they have marbles in their mouth, and they can't speak English well, which is the way you formulate your mouth and your lips. People don't think about this. So if you want to speak Chinese, you have to make sure you get the wah. This is what they do, and this is nothing. That's a fact. I don't know if people stupidly take these things as some criticism. It's just a reality. The international language for everything from science to airplanes is English, and it's for a reason. There has to be an international language, and English is pretty easy to learn if you practice it. But apparently he has the Bruce Lee disease and really can't speak English well. And Bruce Lee thought he'd become a big movie star when he couldn't speak English well. And most people had trouble understanding him, particularly Hollywood people, and particularly in the 70s when things were even tighter. But, Hollywood is a lot of money. I don't know if you understand. I was just reading about a TV show that was produced in Los Angeles for, I think, 20 episodes or something. And they spent $85 million on that season. Well, let's just be nice and pick a guy that nobody understands and have him talk on TV every week. Yeah, and this is the problem happened with Bruce Lee with Kung Fu. Now, people today may be more tolerant to that because there's so many different cultures, but generally, you're not going to see people not speaking well, and that includes you, Jackie Chan, on American TV in any aspect, even on the cable shows we have now, but certainly not on network television in the late 1970s, where literally hundreds of millions of people watched. You want to put your money into that? You want to bet $50 million on this guy that don't speak well, that's too busy cha-chaing around and watching soap operas? That's what Bruce Lee did. If he spent less time getting his cha-cha trophies and more times practicing English, he probably would have been more successful. That's a fact. So if you want to play the game and be in that, and this is, of course, before even Bruce Lee was very popular. But amazingly, Bruce Lee got quite a few movie parts, including The Green Hornet, etc., when he couldn't really speak English well. So the whole idea is that that's a fact. So it's just, if you can't do the job to or meet all the requirements, then you're going to have problems doing it. And should people help you out? Well, Bruce Lee had an awful more success in Hollywood than he deserved. A lot more than he deserved, because he wasn't a talented actor. He didn't put together good scripts or anything else. He did comic book Hong Kong movies, which luckily, because it's his persona on film, in terms of how he looked in his chicken jumping on, whoa, 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 and all this stuff, impressed the comic book watchers in Hong Kong, which was different than their usual films. And there's no doubt that he had great martial arts skills. So the whole idea, but the point is that he was an actor since he was 5, but he certainly didn't do well. Now, Jackie Chan has said the same thing. He hates speaking English and doesn't really speak English very well. He's told producers to make sure that he talks as little as possible, yet he wants to make sure he fills his wallet with actual American money. Same old story, it just doesn't cut it that way. So he's even recently made a film where he only, which had multi-languages in it, which was an interesting film. Of course, another jump around like a ballet guy, use chairs. I mean, it's not martial arts. He doesn't do martial arts. Apparently, he knows martial arts. He was a Hapkido or something. That's what he trained in as his main martial art, and then he moved on into the other martial arts, many of the other ones, the traditional ones, etc. But regardless of knowing martial arts, he doesn't do it. He does a ballet, it's a comedy, etc. That's his style, and everybody else is punching and kicking. Doesn't matter how good he is, he's never going to be noticed for that. So he was the first one to start putting comedy and doing other things. But first of all, I don't think Jackie Chan is very educated. I'm not sure. He didn't really go through school. Did he teach himself to read and write? And all those things that go with it. It certainly doesn't seem like that. He's, like so many people in these types of industries, they seem to be fairly simple people. But I want to get into the fact that Bruce Lee, of course, like everybody that goes through Hong Kong, there's a book called Bruce Lee Lives, which is the title was to grab your attention and get you to buy the paperback that came out in, the late 70s, a few years after his death, that I reviewed, a matter of fact. And it was an interesting little book. And of course, in the end, it said, well, he's not really alive. Some people think, like everything, they escaped somewhere and are hiding out. But what the book did highlight was the huge amount of corruption in the Hong Kong Police Department, where police were making hundreds of thousands of dollars a week. So this is mind-boggling. And this is, again, not written by me, but in the actual book there. And you can probably pick up this book very cheaply. It's not really something that is in great demand, and it's doesn't really talk about much in this area. It talks about general stuff. But what it does is it goes into many pages, or at least several pages, on the corruption in the Hong Kong Police Department, which is important to understand what happened to Bruce Lee. And it states the fact that it is a great possibility that Bruce Lee was killed. I mean, after all, he didn't have these medical problems until he went to Hong Kong to do his films. And all of a sudden, he started having these headaches and other things. Now, some people want to trace this back to back injuries and other things, but there doesn't seem to be any record of him having these problems in the United States whatsoever. He goes to Hong Kong, he starts to have this. He's associated with another controlled person, particularly an attractive actress, who gives him something that could be stated that killed him. He had a drug reaction, or purposely. So basically, and she has been linked to prostitution and so many other things, she's a very dubious character. And of course, you have no choice, and that's what I'm going to get into. And of course, the world hasn't changed. Bruce Lee was the hottest thing to be out there since sliced bread, so to speak. And the point is this was the biggest actor. Everybody knew it. This is a massive industry in Asia, martial arts films. And he's the big boy, came in there, and of course he demanded a lot of things. He wanted greater pay, he was coming from Hollywood, and they say, well, you don't get any of that, you're a beginner here. I'm not sure what happened in the details of that. He may have gotten a little more, but needless to say, his films did fantastic, and this was a guy who was going to make a fortune and was going to be able to do all sorts of things. And then I don't know if he'd ever transferred over to America. Certainly, that would have been difficult. You got to remember that martial arts were not very big back then. They had just started. The big thing was more of the philosophical TV show called Kung Fu, which was intertwined with philosophy and martial arts action, which was a very interesting and well done series written by an actual non-Asian, even though it did have some Asians involved as fight choreographers, from what I understand. I don't know, it was Richard Chow or David Chow. I'm not sure which one of them was, but he was there for the Kung Fu. And of course, it wasn't that big, and Kung Fu only went on for 3 years. Some people claim that Carradine quit, etc. Certainly could be. Carradine didn't want to do TV series too long. He found it to be a grind and wanted to do other things. I don't know how true that is or not, but certainly nothing followed up after that. There wasn't a slew of martial arts TV series after that, or even characters. There was one series that lasted a very short time called The Master with Lee Van Cleave. This didn't last either, which had some fairly bad fight scenes in it. But, so, I mean, it wasn't like this was big. It would take him years to bring that over, and martial arts just weren't that big. This was another phenomena of the late 60s and into the 70s that never really caught on that well, but has grown, obviously, to be humongous in this day and age where it seems like everybody's taking martial arts. So the whole idea is that that has to be understood. We also have to understand that when he was there, you don't do anything anywhere without organized crime and the triads, as they're known in China. Triads were here when the first Chinese came over here with the railroads, the houses, the money. The way they got here were the triads, and this is how all immigration groups come over, and initially part of them, or even given money for, are organized crime based. This happened with the Latins that came here, the Mexicans, who started all these gangs. So this is part of it. And they establish themselves, they are home bases, and they're completely controlled. You can't fight these people. And neither could Bruce Lee. Now, he probably put up he probably thought, well, I'm the big star, I'm coming from America, I'm going to be able to fight them. And Lee may have been extremely arrogant at this time, and people have stated he was very arrogant at this time after his Chinese movie success. Particularly David Carradine, who knew him, said that he was very arrogant. Probably so. Of course, you know, the tough guy attitude was something that sells. That's what people that go to his movies want. They want the chip on the shoulder guy. Now, most people who met Lee thought he was a wonderful guy and had a great personality and fantastic charisma, like most people that have. So how arrogant he was or not, but business-wise, he probably was certainly not going to go to China after leaving America and start giving his money away to organized criminals, and probably thought he was big enough to get away with it. Well, that was a mistake, and they killed him. They think that somebody physically fit as him, and everybody comes up with all sorts of excuses, even Chucky Norris, who probably doesn't have the courage to fight against organized crime, certainly hasn't done much in this country other than write religious books. So the whole idea is that all of this stuff makes sense, and of course, he was known to have lots of different affairs, as I understand. I'm not sure how that's been verified, but certainly this actress, and he's far from home, was certainly a tantalizing tidbit to be around. So she gave him some drugs, and he died. So, conveniently. It wasn't something he took. It wasn't something he got off the street. It wasn't something else. That's how it happened. And she was the one that reported him, had him go to the hospital, etc. Now, this is really very typical of what you would do. As an organized crime person, you don't particularly want to shoot him in the street, even though Jackie Chan found out a little bit different. So the whole idea is that these kind of things needs to be looked at carefully. But with Jackie Chan, we have even more information that is rock solid in what happened to him with the triads. Now, we went through these same things with Steven Seagal. Steven Seagal, who wanted apparently to get in with the mafia initially and then turned over to being the best friend of all police, whatever states he's in. He went to the South and befriended a police chief there. He worked on the border, and of course, in Arizona, he got together with whatever that psychotic Phoenix sheriff is that used to put people in tents in 112 and torture people, basically. So he got in with him and everything else that goes on there to protect himself. Why? Because apparently the Italian mafia threatened him. They wanted 200 grand every time he made a picture. They wanted that money from him and told him that. He eventually went to the FBI and fought against it, but of course he was always living and still is living in fear that he may be assassinated by them because he got the FBI, went in there and had these Italian mafia guys arrested. So I remember seeing an interview with Seagal a few years ago, and of course he was in Arizona, and he being interviewed at his new house with bodyguards, and of course he showed the reporter his machine gun, which is legal there. So this is a case that happens with organized crime even in the United States. So there's not much difference. As I said, there's a gloss in the Western world, and that's it. Europe is an extremely corrupt, all over Europe it's extremely corrupt, all the police. That's just the way it is. And of course, the same thing in the United States. I mean, we see that in recent news where so-called presidents are working with Russian organized crime, it's alleged, and have been for 20 or 30 years. Now, everybody knows this, and instead of saying, why aren't we putting Russian organized crime out of business, they want to blame Trump for being involved in it. Well, why is there that opportunity anyway? It doesn't make any sense. So Seagal had these problems, and what comes even more blatant, which is quite shocking, is the fact of Jackie Chan. Now, Jackie Chan apparently is doing a bunch of good work, even though he's a mouthpiece for the nationalist Chinese. And the reason why is he's using them as a pseudo protection. He has to be on somebody's side. So if you attack the people in power, what is left? Well, nothing is left. And it doesn't matter how rich you are. And he's one of the richest entertainers in the world, by the way, and has been the second or third highest movie star for many, many years. And he makes, millions and millions and millions of dollars a year, I believe, 20, 30, $50 million a year, whatever it is, depending on. So he's made a fortune. He's 66 now. But he's done a lot of good stuff, but he's criticized Taiwan. He's said that the Chinese need to be ruled. He thinks that Hong Kong is too free. It's a city of protest, suggesting demonstrators' rights in Hong Kong should be limited. So all of that is part of and saying how wonderful he thinks China is. So, well, he lives there. I don't know how many people expect that not to be. But he's also come out with some other interesting statements, and I think we need to look at these. But what's even more interesting is what happened to him. I'm not sure exactly. The article here that I'm getting this information from that comes from Time magazine was dated January 7th, 2013. So you're talking about almost 10 years ago as the recording time of this. With an interview that comes from the Chinese magazine Southern People Weekly. And at the time, he was 58. He's now 66, so it states. But it's very, very interesting what we come here in terms of how powerful the triads. And here's a guy that, of course, was pretty popular then and was well known in the United States and China. And he had a big incident. Apparently, he was highly harassed by the triads, which is quite shocking. And he states here to this Chinese magazine, he said, when he was being he claims that he and other actors, and I'm sure they have, all of them, just like everybody else, have been subject to extortion and threatened by gun-wielding villains. In the past, when I was bullied, I hid in the United States, he told the magazine, according to a report in the South China Morning Post. Now, I'm not sure how to take this last thing. I don't know if he was in America, but they opened fire at me once I got off the plane. So he said, in the past, I used to do that, but when he went there now, they shot at him when he got off the plane in America. I'm not sure. Because this is what he follows up with. Finally, the Rush Hour star had enough and fought back. He told the magazine, when I returned to Hong Kong, meaning he was shot out of the plane in the U.S., I don't know. He also said that America is one of the most corrupt countries there is out there. And of course, he's right. It's just they do things differently in terms of it's not as obnoxious, and the police will sit there and act like they're doing something when they don't. But of course, the Hong Kong police are extremely corrupt. We all know that, but all police are. But he said, when I returned to Hong Kong and I was eating outside, more than 20 people surrounded me with melon knives. He said, I pulled out a gun and had 2 more concealed. I told them they had been going too far. So here we are again, one of the top stars in the world is being surrounded in Hong Kong at a restaurant. And of course, everybody's being extorted there. If you got money, you're going to get extorted from, no matter where you are in the world, by the way. I mean, lottery winners are harassed all over Europe and other places, and nothing is ever done about it. It's the same old story because people are being bought off. Ooh, what a surprise. It's no different over there. And of course, as I said, this book that was published in 1980, 1978, somewhere in the late 70s, talking about the Hong Kong police and Bruce Lee, was talking about the great amount of corruption there and how you're talking about in those days making $100,000 a week is mind-screwing. And I wouldn't be surprised at all with all the goods that were going through Hong Kong at that time and still do. I confronted them with 2 guns, he said. I pulled out a gun and had 2 more concealed. I told them that they had going too far. I confronted them with 2 guns and 6 grenades. Wonder where I can get some of those. He added, although he failed to elaborate on the standoff, how the standoff ended. Well, I'm assuming they left after he produced a few grenades. Chan's comments, however, made him a subject of police investigation. Of course, they didn't go after the criminals, they went after him. The possession of firearms without a license is punishable with 14 years of prison in Hong Kong, which is a special administrative region of China. After detectives met with the movie star last week, they decided to drop the case for lack of proof. And a few Hong Kong dollars, while Chan allegedly did not take back his guns and grenade claim, he did say that the incident did not actually take place in Hong Kong. Well, he's just a little bad. I'm not sure. Where did it take place? Was it some other place in China? And of course, Hong Kong's just a little island there. There are other places. So I don't know. It could have taken place in mainland China somewhere because it's very close. The visibility of South China's Tri-X gangs has waned in recent years following a crackdown on gang activities in the 1990s and arrest major bosses, blah, blah, blah. So they arrested some, but that means nothing. Arrest a few people to make it look good, but the criminal underworld is still alive. In Hong Kong, a Christmas Eve raid by police led to the arrest of 56 and this is, of course, many years ago, 56 gang members, discovery of an armory used in Triad's campaign to expand their power. So it just shows you right here. Now this at the, and of course nothing has changed. This was 2013. Here's one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Now I don't know if he paid them off or he got bigger bodyguards or he got more handguns or a little more grenades. But the bottom line is that he was well aware that he was just not going to shoot it out with him. He had to tell them that he had big weapons. Now, I don't know if he had anybody around him or what else was happening, but It's amazing how they wanted to get him for violation of gun laws when he's carrying hand grenades. So, so all of this is part of the reality that goes on. Now, that's just to bring to point there. But as I said, Jackie has come out in favor of the government, trying to get, in general, trying to get the favor of the local police so he can get some sort of protection from them. He's also stated his great support for the police. He did a customer service, social service, whatever it is. He did a spokesman for the Los Angeles Police Department, trying to get Asian people in there. He's worked with Arnold Schwarzenegger and his governor a little bit for little campaigns. Apparently, he's a good ambassador for UNICEF. He has raised millions of dollars for different funds to help building schools, providing books, uniforms for children. And the organization that he ran for that in China expanded even into Europe, apparently, in 2011. So he appears to have done a lot of good things. He's an animal activist, saved China's tigers. So it looks like he interweaves stuff, and he's made these governmental statements to be in favor of the oppressive Chinese government. Seems to me it's kind of obvious here what he's doing. So who do you go to? So he's come out as this kind of nationalistic person, even though he's married to a Taiwanese woman, etc. Most people, and I've listened to the commentary, say that Jackie Chan is a very nice person. He seems to be a party animal, though. He wants to, after filming all day, he'll go and party for 5 or 6 hours, going to restaurants, drinking, and doing endless karaoke night after night after night, as was stated by the director and producer of his film. I believe it was Medallion on the commentaries there. And everybody said what a wonderful guy Jackie is, and so forth. He's also stated of constantly having, every weekend, he would have a big party for all the crew and actors, which he would pay for, and cook expensive steaks and fish and everything else, and would feed everybody on the weekend of a big giant party and give them all the finest drinks. He's done this kind of thing to take care of people and to be this nice guy as much as he can. So, and as I said, I haven't heard anybody to do that. To his credit there. So apparently he's a nice guy and everything else. This attitude of his, which was upsetting me, but after doing research, of course, makes sense. So he's done a lot of good charity work. He's trying to get people educated because he never got educated, because he failed his initial school year, then went to the opera, and I'm assuming they didn't teach him any reading or writing there either. I'm assuming he's literate today. We don't know. That is an important error. So he's doing good work, but this again highlights the fact of the corruption, how the triads work, and they must be, if they're harassing him, they're harassing everybody, plain and simple. And he mentioned other actors, etc. So it's not just him. It's not just this one instance. We can easily look at Bruce Lee as that Bruce Lee was murdered by the triads. He stood up to them, even as Jackie Chan did, and apparently he made his self known enough that he's going to have some serious fights with these people and kill people. I'm not sure that worked. I mean, that's generally not how these people work. They don't care if the triad members get killed, so I'm not sure what happened there. But he certainly was going to put up a fight, apparently. And even though he left for the United States, he wasn't safe there. Was apparently shot at in the United States. There certainly is a huge amount of triad in the United States, particularly in the West Coast, who's been known to have huge amounts of Chinese population who built the railroads in the 1800s and have still been there and are kind of a secret society that is very difficult to get into. Because it is very Chinese-based. You just can't get anybody in there. You need to get Chinese people in there to investigate. So these kind of people pretty much do whatever they want without a problem. And of course, they do whatever they want in China because everybody is bought off. That's the amusingness about the totalitarian government of communist China, is that they're very corrupt and they're all bought off. They talk about how terrible the West and how corrupt it is when they are just as bad, if not worse. So this goes everywhere. So we certainly can understand that. And the rumors that all of a sudden Bruce Lee's death was very strange and he wasn't a person who was sick or anything else, people claim. But even if he was, the point is for him to have blackouts a few days ahead of time, almost like the poisoning had started already, and then finally take another pill from a person that he trusted, particularly an attractive female, makes this whole thing stink. As far as my opinion is, as far as I allege, Bruce Lee was murdered. And none of his followers who want to talk about how great he is ever talk about this. And that's what makes me disgusted at them. They want to say how great he is, what he did, and everything else. And they don't care that he was murdered. And nobody ever has a single statement to talk about that. And quite frankly, I find that repulsive. But very typical of common society that want to live in the world of goofiness and not live in the real world of people. Here we are as another. Of course, he did do martial arts stuff early in his career, then developed this goofy Three Stooges martial art guy. But the point is, here's another one. It must be all the other ones. It must be, Jet Li moved out of Hong Kong to Singapore. I don't know for that reason, but probably that was part of it. We have other major Chinese stars, but they're never going to talk about it. So the whole idea is this is a serious problem around the world and why nothing ever gets done. Nothing ever gets done because of corruption and the view that the world is ran by organized crime because they buy everybody. The other problem, as I mentioned, is the fact of supporting failure. A scientist fails for his entire career, we keep rewarding him and giving him awards. The medical industry, we give billions and billions more every year and produces nothing. We continue to do this and we're exactly where we should be, in a giant poo hole of nothingness that gets stinkier and deeper every day. Until next time.